The reading today is from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 21, verses 1 through 11. May we open our hearts and minds to the reading of these words. And when they drew near to Jerusalem and came to Bethphage, to the Mount of Olives, then Jesus sent 2 disciples, saying to them, "Go into the village opposite you, and immediately you will find an ass tied and a colt with her. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, you shall say, 'The Lord has need of them,' and he will send them immediately." This took place to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet, saying, "Tell the daughters of Zion, behold, your king is coming to you, humble and mounted on an ass, and on a colt, the foal of an ass." The disciples went and did as Jesus had directed them. They brought the ass and the colt and put their garments on them, and he sat thereon. Most of the crowd spread their garments on the road, and others cut branches from the trees and spread them on the road. And the crowds that went before him and that followed him shouted, "Hosanna to the Son of David! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord! Hosanna in the highest!" And when he entered Jerusalem, all the city was stirred, saying, "Who is this?" And the crowd said, "This is the prophet Jesus from Nazareth of Galilee." May we be granted wisdom and courage for interpretation.
So the pressing question that happens every Palm Sunday is, why is Jesus riding 2 animals? So there's a really simple question to this, because you don't separate the foal from its mother, because the foal would be anxious. And then when you're trying to teach an animal how to ride, you dress them first. So it's not like Jesus was out there like a rodeo queen riding both of them, So it's a simple answer. That's my answer. You'll find a million others, but that's mine, and I'm sticking with it. So my family is a family of storytellers. My dad's parents, in their heavily accented English, would always tell us stories about the old country. And when I was little, I thought everything was old there. Their clothes were old, their furniture was creaky and wobbly. And Daddy told us stories of being a sharecropper, of picking cotton and dragging through the sandy soil a bag that was big enough to pull 100 pounds of cotton, and of being on an escort ship for the USS Missouri as they went through Tokyo Bay. And when they docked, he watched through binoculars that I have as the 11 representatives of the Japanese government signed the instrument of surrender, and it was accepted by General MacArthur. My mother told us about her great-grandmother, who was full-blood Shawnee from Ohio, and these wonderful, exciting, and terribly scandalous stories of her mother, Loretta, who, among many things, was a ridge-running bootlegger during Prohibition. I told my sons these stories at night before bedtime, and always around the campfire or in the tent when we were camping. And today, my sons are storytellers, and as I hear them tell the stories, I hear they have incorporated these stories into their beings. These stories have made us a family. And as time goes on, the stories are told in ways that are true, but not quite right. For instance, in Ben's rendition of me encountering a disgruntled farmer whose workers had left in the night because I, the do-gooding minister, had reported abuse, well, Ben had me up against the wall of the converted pig barn in which they lived with a cocked shotgun to my nose. Now, really, I was in my car with a window rolled down with a cocked shotgun to my nose, But Ben's version does convey the fear and the intensity of the feeling I knew. And even though the details were not quite right, the story was true. But his is not the only story that grows and changes with time. When I check back with relatives, I learn that some of my details are embellished. Even so, as the details may not be quite right, the stories are true. And these stories bind us as a family and make us who we are. It's in the midst of wonderful storytelling where we meet Jesus today in Matthew's gospel. Now, the author of the Gospel of Matthew was probably a Jewish Christian, and many people think a scribe. The historical evidence suggests that he wrote between the years of 80 and 90 and addressed his work to a community in conflict, a community that was establishing who they were now that they were no longer in Jerusalem. You see, the temple and their family's way of being in the world had been destroyed. They were Jewish Christians who were pushed out of the larger Jewish communities who were not following Jesus, but who all were in northern Galilee or Syria. So everybody was trying to figure out who they were in this new place. The people to whom this author was telling his story were Jewish Christians living after the Great Revolt, and everyone knew about the Great Revolt. You see, from 66 to 70, the Jewish people were in conflict and gruesome war with their Roman overlords. The historian Josephus documented the events of the years, so we know facts of just how extreme the suffering was and what the Jews endured. In the year 70, Jerusalem was obliterated. The temple was smashed, homes destroyed, and a stream of refugees made their way north. And then 10 to 20 years later, this is when we find the first hearers of today's story. They were devout, but without the temple and all of its rituals that marked the activities of their lives, without the temple and the priests, the Pharisees grew in authority and power as they gave order to people. In Jesus' own time, you see, the Pharisees weren't that prominent of a group. But Matthew tells his story, and he makes the Pharisees his main antagonists because it's precisely what's going on in the life of Matthew's community after this war. The Pharisees are becoming their opponents, so in Matthew, we're watching two Jewish groups, Matthew's Christian Jewish group and the local Pharisaic groups in tension over what would be the future of Judaism. And naturally, they have very different answers. And I give you all this wonky background because when I was preparing this sermon, I got a little stumped. And I was stumped by a word in today's lesson, the word stirred. And in some interpretations, it's troubled or turmoil. The city was in turmoil. We read, and when he entered Jerusalem, all the city was stirred, or all the city was in turmoil. Now, before preparing for this sermon, my understanding of this story after hearing it all my life was that this was a jubilant crowd. Of course, they were shouting, Hosanna, which means save us now or deliver us. But somehow it was still a really happy shouting, save us, happy because they recognized who Jesus was and they were thrilled to see him. But stirred flummoxed me. It sounded like a verb one would find in a romance novel. So I looked it up. And in the Greek, this sentence might say something more like, the city was quaking. Because the word stirred that the translators used comes from a Greek verb which derives from seismos, to quake. So the people were not stirred in the sense that they were moved or that they were excited or thrilled. They were experiencing the early tremors of the great quake that Matthew knew was going to take place. The great quake that broke everything and laid the foundation for the community in which he lived. Matthew's the only gospel writer to include earthquakes. There's one at Jesus' resurrection and one at his crucifixion. But the ground was quaking even before then. These stirrings, these tremblings and quakings are not just background noise to the events happening. They are signs that all that is known is changing. No longer does the historical norm rule. No longer do the grand, the strong, the well-armed, and the wealthy inherit the earth. No, the meek, the ones who notice the smallest of creatures, and those who take time to do what needs to be done without needing praise. They have a place to live, to grow food, and to share. No longer are the poor cursed because they're blessed because they now live in a world where those who live in a messianic way share and care for one another. And those who mourn, they're allowed space and time to grieve, to re-knit their lives together. And those who seek peace, those who do not want to build oppressive empires, those who want the best for all, they will know what it means to live as an offspring of all that is holy. The author of Matthew is telling his story to people who live in a new world, a world much different from that which many of them had known just 20 years earlier. A little further in the 21st chapter of the gospel, we read, when the chief priests and the scribes saw the wonderful things that he did, and the children who were crying out in the temple, Hosanna to the Son of David, the priests were indignant, and they said to him, do you hear what they are saying? Have you heard what you have done to these children? The children, the new to the world, the ones not yet beaten down by the empire, the ones still able to dream without dread, to imagine without obstacles, to celebrate without cynicism. The children in the temple were the ones who worried those who sold out to the oppressive Roman Empire. The children were the ones that threatened the authority. Just look what you've done, Jesus. You're leading these little ones astray. You're rocking the boat. Their energy, their creativity, their unbridled hope. Do you know what this can do to us? Oh, yeah. Yes, indeed, I do, says Jesus. Perfect praise will change all things. I wonder if some of the children that were in the temple were now adults in this new Jewish and Christian community who had migrated to the north. I wonder if some of them were people who told their stories to one another and to the author of Matthew. I wonder if there really were earthquakes, or if what these children remember, the battles they survived, were akin to the noise, the rattle, the bang, the chaos of earthquakes. I wonder. But then I know that these people had incorporated all their stories into their lives, and that their stories made them who they were. I hear their stories with my ears and my imagination 2,000 years later. I have heard their stories all my life, and they have been incorporated into who I am and how I live in this world. And I know that even if all the details may not be quite right, the stories are true. 2,000 years later, we live in a wealthy and aggressive and oppressive empire. I have all of my life, and we can hear the stories of those who may have witnessed Jesus and those who got the stories secondhand with ready, primed ears. We see what greed, patriarchy, racism, and xenophobia can do to others. Yet, because we live in a subculture that believes the risen Christ dwells within this assembled body, that justice, mercy, and care are paramount to all that we do, we live in a world post-earthquake. We live in a world where the realm of God is known even while we mourn, even while we seek justice, even while we imagine and dream the dreams of children. And we will tell their stories, which have become our stories, to our children. And they will tell their stories to their children. And through it all, the details may not be quite right, but the stories will be true. For these stories bind us as a family, and they make us who we are. Amen.